William Birkin was a man faced with a decision that would lead to the end of thousands of people in an effort to save his own life. Upon realizing that Umbrella had no intentions of actually promoting him, he decided to leak secrets of what they were working on to an outside organization. Unfortunately, upon doing so, a miscommunication would happen and he would be gunned down in the process. When he was mere moments away from the end, however, in a last-ditch effort to stay alive, he injected himself with the G virus, which would lead him down a road of negative mutations that in reality just prolonged the inevitable. So this is going to be an information-heavy video. We need to discuss the G virus, Birkin, and ultimately the 5 main stages of his transformation, as well as the biology behind it. So strap in, because as I write this, I have a feeling it's probably going to be a long one, so let's get to it. Let's start where all good stories start, at the beginning of Birkin's career, to see how he got to where he was and where he would ultimately end up. Dr. William Birkin was essentially a freaking child prodigy. He decided to specifically focus on virology, or the study of viruses, and obtained his doctorate by the age of 15. Soon after Umbrella caught wind of him, they decided he would make an excellent addition to the corporation. He was offered a training program at a laboratory which would elevate him to executive status. He ended up taking this opportunity under the oversight of Dr. James Marcus. While there, Birkin met Dr. Albert Wesker and developed a rivalry that started out friendly, but eventually would turn sour. During this time, more than just training was taking place, and instead a form of indoctrination was being imposed on the doctors and their young minds. This would help him adapt to the ethics of Umbrella Corporation, but let's call a spade, the complete lack of ethics, as anyone who was allowed in without this might actually end up blowing the whistle on them. Essentially, to make a long story short, after the training was concluded, they were allowed into the senior level roles. This is where they met Lisa Trevor, a woman who had been a test subject since 1967, which coincidentally was an excellent year for Ford building Mustangs. Anyways, after meeting her, Birkin would go on to work with the tyrant virus by mixing genes of it with the Ebola virus. If you would like to hear about the T virus, I'll put a card up on screen now. Anyhow, this study of viruses would help him go on to create a better virus. This virus was known as the G virus. You see, the T virus degrades the human mind, had a high lethality rate, and made humans massively aggressive, all while damaging the body as well. As Birkin continued his work, he discovered almost the polar opposite, the G virus. The G virus, or Golgotha virus, which I'm sure there'll be 100 people in the comments saying I pronounced it wrong, has the same origins as the T virus. They both hail from the progenitor family, but that's where the similarities end in most respects. It is known that the T virus causes cellular necrosis, whereas the G virus has regenerative properties. In fact, it is so regenerative, it is able to bring a host back to life after their expiration. It will make its way through, restoring cellular function seemingly to the point that any injuries sustained are negated and repaired. But there is a much darker side of G virus, it seems. This restorative property is not unlike our own ability to heal, but the cells never stop dividing, which is a perfect time to jump into some science about how this works. It's basically simple mitosis. When a person is injured in a non-lethal way and the body is allowed to continue on, certain hormones are released in response to this injury. So these human growth hormones allow the cells to express an almost cancerous level of growth to repair whatever wound took place, whether it be a broken bone, muscle tear, or skin abrasion. Now, this is super simplified because there's a lot of other hormones and mechanisms in place, but we'll just keep it simple. But however, once the repair is completed, the cells go back to normal levels of mitosis and you don't end up being a giant cancerous tumor. The G virus, unfortunately, does not appear to turn mitosis off. So short term, yes, the host is repaired, but the mutations continue to advance and more tumorous growths appear on the body of this person. The original intent of this virus was simply to enhance humans as well. The idea was that if properly given to a person, this could in theory produce people with enhanced abilities. Unfortunately, however, this has not been seen with the Golgotha virus, so nobody really understood what Birkin was going for. What is seen, however, is a perfect summation of runaway mitosis. To quote, "From what is seen in the runaway mutations of Dr. Birkin and Dr. Miller, taking massive quantities of Golgotha causes severe mutations such as radical increase in muscle mass, the formation of claws for self-defense, enhanced strength, and a deterioration of intelligence. Both Dr. Birkin and Dr. Miller were eventually driven only to hunt down blood relatives out of an instinctive need to use them, but had little intelligence beyond the ability to speak simple words. Although both demonstrated brief moments of clarity in defiance of the virus early in their mutations, both mutants also developed enormous functional eyes across their body. These are akin to the teratomas tumors, which grow body parts. However, there is only so much damage that the body can take before it becomes destabilized, leaving the G virus only to regenerate and evolve the remains. The G virus is also capable of reanimating dead bodies, creating G zombies. So essentially the statement, the best laid plans of mice and men, can be applied to Birkin and his work on the G virus. With that quick rundown completed, let's take a look at the morphology of Birkin through his mutagenic stages and see what happens when the virus dilutes the human form to virtually biological nonsense and what remains of the person when finished. The first stage of the mutation is known as G1. During this stage, many different areas of the body are affected, and we are beginning to see other portions of the body start taking shape to what they will ultimately become. First, the legs have become more muscular as the runaway mitosis has packed on muscle. This muscle is beginning to rip the pants of Birkin, but luckily he still has his stylish suede shoes in place. The torso of Birkin is quite clearly doubling in size, and the left side of the abdomen and chest skin is still existing there to some degree. On the right side of the body, a mass of bone and muscle has formed, which is almost becoming a second consciousness. The tumorous mass has its own thoughts and feelings as well as instincts on which way the body should travel. It also has completely taken over the right arm of Birkin with what can only be its more than likely own set of nervous tissue, completely separate from Birkin's control. The brain of Birkin struggles for control at this point and is fairly successful in occasionally controlling the growth on its body. However, as its nervous system becomes more established and his wanes, he will lose this control. There is a mass of bones jutting out over the shoulder which are there seemingly to protect this massive eye. This eye does indeed function, and when it spots a human, this will trigger a response to attack, which then becomes a battle of wills for who gets to use the legs. The eye is also somewhat protected by a type of eyelid made out of muscle. Shooting this muscular lid does no damage, so it can be assumed that there is bone in there protecting this eyelid. So I find it interesting at times you can see Birkin clawing at the eye and tearing it open. At this point, his mind has some control, probably a 60-40 split to be honest, and his voice becomes less monstrous as he calls for help. This control is quickly lost, however, as it switches back over to the tumor. What does losing the battle for your own body look like? Well, look no further than the G2 mutation. G2 is essentially heralded as the end of Birkin for the most part. At this point, he has virtually no control over the body, and this is designated by the head hierarchy, but we will get to that in a moment. The legs and feet of this creature are in their normal human form, however, more muscle has been added as time has passed. Alas, his shoes are now lost to time. His pants are also beginning to tear from the sheer size of his quadriceps, so swogoles. These legs now provide enough power for the creature to leap and run. Birkin is no longer powerful enough to fight for control, so the creature can move unhindered and without second brain interference. More than likely, internally this brain has been cut off with most of the nervous tissue severed. This has allowed the creature control. It should be noted, however, that I must stress this, most of the tissue has been cut off. In some instances, even in this stage, Birkin can struggle for control, but it requires destruction of the new head for this to be possible. However, it is shown, which I will discuss in a moment, that Birkin still is able to maintain control for a split second in the remake. Anyhow, moving up the abdomen, we see new arms are beginning to grow, and they are fused to the stomach area. These arms are not the old arms, but instead are beginning to grow via G virus mutation, more than likely using genetic coding information from the DNA causing this gene expression. These arms are still somewhat vestigial at this point though, however. The chest is massive. You can see how Birkin has changed. With his head being demoted to the left pectoral muscle, he almost appears to be an afterthought, and his face appears to be fusing onto the body. His hair is still fairly visible at this point, however. The right pectoral muscle and right arm, where the G virus began taking over the body initially, is massive and seems the furthest along. The large eye now sits forward rather than to the side, and the shoulder still possesses the bony crown. This right hand is massive, almost as large as the torso. Here we can see 4 large claws with another smaller 5th and 6th claw. These claws are razor sharp and, packed with the power of the arm, are able to tear humans in half. More so, they can even tear through a T-00 in half, which it does so at the elevator. This is interesting because it almost seems to be done out of a protective instinct, which suggests Birkin may still be somewhat in control. The left arm is beginning to transform as well as its own muscle mass increases. Still though, it appears to roughly retain its human arm shape, but most of the skin at this point is long gone. And finally, moving up to the head, we can see the human-shaped face beginning to form with yellow eyes. What is pretty strange is how the mouth is also forming, but much like how the vestigial arms are clearly a sign of gene expression being activated, it's clear the G virus is using what already exists within the body to grow new appendages and structures, because the teeth of this creature look extremely human, if not a little sharper. G3 is when humanity is lost. The only remaining features that this thing has that it may have been human is nothing more than a face that has been virtually grown over with tissue on the side of the rib cage. This is the last bit of Birkin we can see, and now his mind is basically gone. Whether he's trapped in there or dissolved is unknown, but this creature does appear fairly intelligent, so it is possible that he is still somewhat there. At any rate, there is no controlling this creature. The feet of the G3 mutation are massive. Not only that, much like a thing that I have talked about in another episode that gets me instantly demonetized, so I can't say its name, but here I'll spell it, L-I-C-K-E-R, this foot structure is without skin and has turned from plantigrade into digitigrade plantigrade. It will now walk on the balls of its feet and sport massive claws. Moving up the leg, we see the overall structure has changed due to the amount of muscle located on the body. It still has a plantigrade leg structure, but its feet sit further back now, so the knees seem to bend over the toes. The quadriceps have now begun to grow bony coverings, allow for a type of armor to form. On the other leg, another eye has sprouted, allowing for more visual information to be taken in, making this creature more lethal. Any manhood in the area has been lost, much like that with the LICKERSs, and the abdomen now has a black and purple covering of skin-like material. The torso of this creature is large and has an attachment of 4 arms. The center of the chest now has large bony teeth, which will give way to a larger mouth later. Whether this is an intended end goal or really just protecting this creature's internal organs, though, is not known. The face of Birkin can be found on the left side of this torso. The previous vestigial arms are now fully functional, but still smaller than the original arms. They have become very similar to human arms in terms of proportion and size to this creature, and possess several fingers with razor-sharp claws. They also possess a thumb appendage on these hands, once again suggesting that DNA is being used and altered to create these growths, and it's not just random. A hard covering appears to be on the left arm as opposed to the right arm. The original arms Birkin had have been pushed to the shoulders and almost appear like wings. These arms are still not equal in size, however. The right arm has clearly enlarged, as it has had more time to do so, and now possesses calcified claws several feet in length, as well as the ability to grapple and completely wrap around a person. The eye still sits forward here too. The left upper arm is quite large and appears to be taking on a similar form to the G2 stage of infection for Birkin's original right arm. So it appears a clear path of evolution is beginning to show on these arms. Now, G4 is where things start to get a little muddled depending on the lore you refer to. I will be covering the remake lore, but just to note, originally the G4 infection was a continuation of becoming more animal than monster. It possessed 4 front arms and 2 back legs, which is why the legs were becoming more digitigrade as opposed to remaining plantigrade. However, this is not what we find in the remake for the G4. The G4 transformations is one that takes the previous changes, oddly enough, and turns them on their heads or completely negates them. The feet lose a toe, but the generalized structure of the foot is now more plantigrade, with the heels and balls of the feet placed on the ground. The humanoid structure becomes a little more muddled at this point as well, because the aberrations caused by the G virus are beginning to stack up. Imagine like you print something out and then you scan it and then you print it from that and then you scan it and you print it from that. That's essentially what's happening to the DNA. It's just getting more and more messed up with each scan. The chest and abdomen region of the G4 mutation is a large mass of bone and eyes. This creature has what can be assumed to be ribs jutting out in many different directions. Birkin is now approaching his final form, where this will become something like a mouth. The right shoulder is much larger than the left, and the eyes seem to have disappeared in preferences of many eyes. The arm is still functional and will be used to allow this creature to lunge and crawl up walls, as well as hold onto these walls. The left arm and shoulder resemble very little of their original arms Birkin had, as the mutation after mutation has basically left the arms a stringy mass of muscle and bone. The 2 arms that previously were seen have become vestigial once more and been reabsorbed by the body entirely. The G virus is very volatile, and as such, limbs wax and wane without warning, although it is said that the reason for this creature's changes is to adapt to its surroundings. Finally, we get to the head. The head of this particular version seems to have begun to melt back into the body. Under the head, a large mouth has begun to form. I just want to point something out. I think it's pretty bizarre that this creature would seemingly be on a track towards a humanoid or quadrupedal form and then take a turn towards this mutation, but after a couple fights that were lost, Birkin was starting to become quite injured and the body began to adapt. That's the only thing I can really think of. This brings us though to the G5 mutation. After suffering heavy damage from interactions with Claire and Leon, the body was injured to a point that the G virus began to mutate out of control to survive its environment. This meant that any resemblance to a human form was dropped. Now, I say it was to adapt, but there is a theory that on a cellular level, the DNA and cells themselves were becoming damaged, so this caused the G virus to go haywire and ultimately lead to Birkin turning into a massive blob. This blob is basically what you would expect in HELL. God, I hate the algorithm and the words it identifies. Anyhow, it is not known how, but after Birkin's last encounter, he made it onto the train heading out of the Umbrella facility. Here, he came across Leon and Claire one final time. By this point, there is barely any morphology to speak of. He is simply existing as a mass of muscle and bone. There is still an intelligence in it because it doesn't just exist as a lump of cells, because quite clearly it is attempting to attack Leon. A large central mouth has opened up fully from where it was in the torso of Birkin. It's possible that this creature has retained some of Birkin's initial intellect, as again, it is attempting to leave the facility. However, the car that this mass resides in is uncoupled and it is consumed by a fireball. The G virus initially seemed to be for the purpose promise of creating superhumans. However, in reality, it would take the human ability to heal itself and more than likely alter this particular area of DNA to cause the cells to kick over into overdrive concerning mitosis. Normally, this will lead to cancer, and in a way, it did, because ultimately this led to a blob of cancer that needed to be burned. But for a while, the body does hold out despite all the changes to its internal chemistry and functions, as well as generalized structure. So there you have it. I hope everyone enjoyed a little bit about the G-Virus and William Birkin. I'll have to eventually do a G-Virus episode like the T-Virus one I did a while back. But anyways, leaving a like is great. If you are new, consider subscribing. I will drop my Twitter, Discord, merch, and Patreon links in the description if you guys are interested in that. Also, speaking of Patreon, I would like to thank a few of my patrons. The two astronauts are It's Not a Spoon and Joseph Givens, as well as our scientists are Artyom Shornage and the Lone Titan. Thank you guys for your support. And to the rest of you awesome patrons, I really do appreciate it, guys. It does help a lot. Anyhow, that about does it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.